Comma Media, it's Give 'em the Business, a show about Black entrepreneurs and business leaders sharing their stories of adversity and success. I'm Troy Evans, and on today's show, we highlight some of the impactful moments from the previous 20 conversations on Give 'em the Business. They say 99% of podcasts never make it past episode 20, a sobering statistic that speaks to just how much persistence, planning, and passion it takes to keep showing up. Week after week, you've got to build, deliver value, and earn the right to be heard. That's no small feat. In our last episode, Give 'em the Business officially crossed that threshold. 20 powerful conversations with Black entrepreneurs, innovators, and visionaries who've built boldly and shared openly. And today, on episode 21, we pause to reflect and celebrate a milestone most never reach. When I started Give 'em the Business, I had 3 driving motivations. First, I was struck by how many people simply didn't know the incredible contributions Black entrepreneurs have made and continue to make in business, and I wanted to change that. Second, I'm a lifelong learner, and I saw this podcast as a chance to tap into the hard-earned wisdom of those who've been in the trenches of building successful businesses and apply it to my own ventures. And third, I'm a connector at heart. I wanted to create a space where entrepreneurs could not only be heard, but find each other, learn from one another, and grow together. At first, the guests were just friends and colleagues, and we would record an episode whenever our calendars aligned. But the response from you, the listeners and viewers, has been overwhelming. Your messages of support, your shares, your feedback, it's made it clear that Give 'em the Business is more than a podcast. It's a platform, and I'm committed to growing it with more consistency, more reach, and even deeper conversations. So today we're celebrating by revisiting some of my favorite moments from the journey so far. Those standout insights, honest reflections, and business gems that motivate us and give us the fuel to continue. If you've been following Give 'em the Business, thank you for your support. If you're just joining, this is the perfect episode to see what we're all about. Let's take it back before we take it forward. This next moment is especially meaningful. Julius Hollis joined me to reflect on the legacy of his late brother, Michael Hollis, a dear friend of mine and the visionary behind Air Atlanta, the only Black-owned commercial airline in the history of the U.S. Julius played a vital role in helping Michael bring that bold vision to life. In this segment, he shares the behind-the-scenes story of resilience and innovation that allowed Air Atlanta to make history.
We grew up empowering each other. We grew up as young men and women in a segregated Atlanta during the 50s and 60s, during the upheaval of the civil rights movement. So we were the first benefactors of that beloved community that Dr. King, John Lewis, and Andy Young and C.T. Vivian and all gave their lives to create. So from that emerged a community in Atlanta that's unparalleled because of the leadership of Maynard Jackson, Leroy Johnson, and so many others who were public elected officials that made it possible for all of us who've been lucky to be dubbed entrepreneurs to translate this enormous goodwill, this enormous progressive mechanism into one that we transformed into empowering communities, empowering individuals in terms of developing economic empowerment and political empowerment. We leveraged our political strength into creating an economic mecca, which Atlanta is now. It is a Black economic mecca in every country around the world, that's in Africa, that's in the Caribbean, indigenous people in South America. They looked to Atlanta because of the movement that Dr. King and Andy Young and Hosea Williams and Ralph Abernathy and John Lewis, how they used social civil unrest to create human rights, and from the human rights and civil rights struggles, that translated into political power created by Maynard Jackson and Julian Barnes and so many others that created this great economic empowerment for entrepreneurs like myself. At that time, Michael Hollis had left 3 Mile Island Commission, where he was Deputy General Counsel. He had been appointed by Jimmy Carter. He and President Carter were very close. And Michael walks in my office at Exim Bank after he had left Oppenheimer investment banking firm, where he had gone for 2 years after the 3 Mile Island Commission had expired, and said, he walked in, closed the door, and said, "Let me talk to you, Julius." I said, "What's up, my man?" He said, "I want to start a commercial airline." So I looked at him. I said, "Wait a minute, I know my brother. He is smart. He's gutsy." I looked at him for about 2 minutes, sure. And then I pulled out, in those days you didn't have a whiteboard, so I pulled out my pad. I said, "All right, let's tell me how you going to do this."
So it was that quick? In that
2
2 minutes?
2 minutes. So for the next 2 hours, we went through A, through B, through C, through D. 2 hours turned into 4 hours. 4 hours turned into 6 hours. And by the 6th hour, I said, okay. I mean, in the 3rd hour, actually, I said, okay, we got it. Because in my head, I knew it could be done. The question was, how do you can raise the money? How do you raise the money for a commercial airline, which had never been done by a black entrepreneur? But I knew, and he made a good point, we had Maynard Jackson. We had the political clout here in Atlanta to do an airline. And then we had another secret weapon. My roommate in Washington at the time, I was living in Washington, was George Dowley, who was the first black person appointed by Carter on the Civil Aeronautics Board, which regulated airlines. So all the pieces just fell in place. In 1967, 68, and Clarence became our friend, our godfather, and there's not a day that went by, or not a monthly or quarter, that we didn't talk to Clarence. And it was just not just about business, it was just personal. And so Clarence really was like he's the godfather.
Right.
He was our godfather. He was like our father. He gave us advice, good advice. We could take some of it. But through his experiences and counsel, it was somebody, as young men who was raised by 2 black women, became very important for us.
I thought I was doing, so I raised like $20,000 when I was 19. You're talking about you raised $350,000 at 16, 17 years old. That's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it happened. It happened. If you go to YouTube, you'll see Quadrant Records. Somebody told me about 2 years ago that if you go to YouTube, pull up Quadrant Records, you'll see the record there. You can listen to the music.
When we talk about revitalizing communities through real estate, Rob Jones is a name that leads with both heart and strategy. Here are some moments from our conversation that tap into the success secret of entrepreneurship.
Well, yeah, at the time George Bush was in office, we had a Republican who was in favor of deregulation, and so both in favor of deregulation and who was also a proponent of home ownership. So there was this vast kind of overtures and policy that really fueled and encouraged home ownership, which then led to the mortgage industry allowing for dead people to get a mortgage and beyond. So, yeah, so if you're talking about fueling home ownership, then yeah, I mean, at the time, it could not have gotten any more robust than that. However, you know, in retrospect, and even along the way, you know, you look at it and you understand that it was not a healthy market. I think we were in the right place at the right time to take advantage of it. And I think we had the components amongst ourselves and the relationships, the political relationships which we were beginning to develop, to put ourselves in a position to build a brand and really build a company. But during that whole venture, there were still a lot of things that I could intuitively see as an entrepreneur and the things I learned in business school to know that a good market in that sense was covering a lot of mistakes. And so, you know, it's a capital-intensive business and we were making a lot of money, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're doing everything right. And so I spent a lot of time even knowing that the company was not, you know, fully functioning the way it needed to be. I spent a lot of time studying publicly traded companies, home building companies, and Fortune 500 companies that were in Atlanta, and spending a lot of time, you know, understanding processes and policy making inside of companies, and just the culture, understanding what a good culture would be for, you know, in our case, a development home building company. Even in entrepreneurship, I always tell people that your number one job is to solve problems. Like, you know, I reference, there's a scene in a movie called The Martian at the very end when Matt Damon is talking to, he's a professor after he gets off of Mars. And for NASA, he's a professor. He's talking to this class who, you know, picking his brain. And he just basically says, you know, they ask him, how did he do it? And he said, I'd wake up every day and I would say to myself, if I solve enough problems, I'll get home.
You do the math. You solve one problem, then you solve the next one, and then the next. And if you solve enough problems, you get to come home.
And so that's the way I look at it. I wake up every single day knowing that my day is going to be about solving problems, and that's the way I approach it. And that's the way I approached it back in, is that I just got to solve this problem one at a time. And you solve enough problems, you get a chance to go home, or you get a chance to be where you want to be in life. A lot of people have these fears, and some people are scared of spiders, some people are scared of heights. Some people wake up in the middle of the night scared of falling off a building or riding a bike with no brakes down the hill. I'm scared of a job, literally. Like, I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about what my life would be if I had to go to a job. And so that fear, for me, became a healthy motivation not to even let that enter into my mind as an option. And so it was always trying to anticipate and stay ahead of creating something to be able to generate enough cash flow. But also, the fact of the matter is you also got to kind of decrease your lifestyle and be willing to make the hard decisions for a mentality of delayed gratification. And so that comes along with it as much as the success, and not wavering from that and being okay. So, I mean, even to this day, one of my main principles and what keeps me in motion is the balance between being content and ambitious at the same time, which is a lot of people ask me, what's your secret? That's my secret. Because it's very difficult to do. You got to be content with where you are. If nothing changed in my life right now, I make another penny, I'm happy where I am right now. However, I get up every single day trying to get way more than I got today. And so that balance between, being able to walk in your house and be happy and content with where you are, but still waking up with a level of aggression towards the world of capitalism is a balance that is a lot of people cannot strike.
From federal leadership to private equity, Cassius Butts has seen it all. Here's a standout moment from my conversation with him.
For me, it's just as important as it is as you wake up every day, you wash your face, you brush your teeth. You have to have it, especially in the entrepreneurial world. Networking to me it's almost like an art. It really is. It's an art knowing that you have the opportunity, that's the key word, the opportunity to get something from someone else that you need, right? You may not even know what that is, But if you go into a room, know that the first thing your mindset should be is that you have to give yourself to someone first so they can see that you have an open hand. And you have to check your ego at the door. If you don't do that, your ego will check you, and you'll find yourself on the outside looking in.
Bud Atkins took a niche in the information technology industry and turned it into a vehicle for generational success.
It was another cultural shock because I didn't know what corporate America was because I had never been in corporate America. When I started with IBM, I wore so many sports jackets, they called me Mannix, if you may remember the old TV detective. I didn't own a suit. I even strolled in one time in this beige leather sport jacket, which, I didn't realize how far away from the corporate norm I was. When I got my first paycheck, the first thing I did was I went to Richmond Brothers and bought a navy blue three-piece suit and 3 white shirts and some ties. And also the other marker, a cross pin. I started to quickly understand the corporate mentality and how different it was from even coming from an accounting background where, you have a desk and you're kind of out of the way and you're not really dealing with the public.
And that's because you didn't see that image where you were growing up in Cleveland.
Oh, nothing even close to that. When I told my mother that I had a sales job at IBM, her understanding of sales was retail sales, working in a department store. But, my parents couldn't expose me to these things because neither of my parents ever finished high school. So they had a totally different impression of what that corporate world looked like, and they couldn't educate me about the corporate world. Attorneys and the accountants, the CPAs, were black firms. Obviously they weren't black banks, but I was dealing with black people in majority banks. So I think that was good from the perspective that they could relate to me what the corporate banking world looks like, how to work within that system as well. And I don't think that I would have gotten that kind of benefit if I was dealing with white bankers. And it's my opinion, and it's only an opinion, it doesn't necessarily have to be fact. But I think that most of the time, black entrepreneurs are viewed as a risk, where white entrepreneurs doing the same thing are viewed as an opportunity. And, working with black bankers, I think they see you at least as neutral, but certainly not to the degree that you're viewed as a risk by white bankers.
Few people understand leadership and culture like Dr. Damon Williams. His take on leadership, culture, and scale left a deep impression, and this moment is one of the most powerful.
I was failing everything, and an individual came to me named Frank Longstreth, and 6'5", snowy-haired white man. And to that point in my life, I never had a conversation with someone who was of a different race and ethnicity to me. I can't remember any teachers. I definitely don't remember any advisors or counselors or anybody. So here I was, I'm 15 years old, 16 years old, never had a conversation with somebody different of a race ethnicity than me. And that's the same thing many of our black college students have when they go to college today. Mm-hmm. Still haven't had that difference of experience, that intimate type of interaction and contact. And so he comes to me and he says, Williams, I understand you're struggling with some things. And I was embarrassed. Didn't know kind of what to say, how to say, what to do. But he created a pathway where he allowed me to say I needed help without losing my dignity. And I appreciate that in him greatly. And in essence, what he told me was, look, you're smart, or if you wouldn't be here. He said, but what you need help with is understanding how to overcome a problem when it confronts you. He said, I can help you with that. And basically what he said was, and every night at my boarding school from 6 o'clock on to lights out, you had to either be in your room, in mandatory study hall, in the library, or working with a professor. And so in this instance, he, as the professor, and all the professors lived on campus, he said, I want you to come to my home and I'm going to tutor you. And my wife is going to tutor you every evening. He was like, but this is the deal. You can't come when you're struggling with something. You can't come when you just have a test coming up. He said, you got to come every day. And so we had classes 6 days a week, shirt and tie mandatory, 6 days a week. So he was like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday. He got Saturday off. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday. So that's what I did for 3 years. And I tell you what, Troy, it was the foundation of what taught me how to really put my nose to the grind and really start chipping away at something. Those spaces where I came to understand, what it means to really stand strong in this work, right? It's not all going to be easy. There's going to be times where you're going to be attacked by conservative forces. There's going to be times where maybe national figures are, like happened to me, going to be calling you out of your name on national TV for just standing up doing your job as a diversity officer. And there's going to be times where diversity leaders have to understand that there's these moments of truth where you're going to be aggressed against inside of with your colleagues. They're going to microaggress against you, these everyday insults. They're going to try to invalidate your presence. And you have to understand how you're going to deal with those things. And at the same time, there's going to come moments where you're probably going to have to say what's uncomfortable. Do what's uncomfortable. One of the things we talk about when you're a diversity officer, a really good one, you become the conscience of the organization, good, bad, or indifferent. Now, should you? No. Is that in the job description? No. They put the SVP, Chief Diversity Officer, and must be moral conscience of institution. Absolutely not. But when we peel beneath the layers of, what is the espoused job and then what is the real job, a part of the real job is you have to have the ability to be that conscious. And beyond that, you have to have very strong moral convictions in who you are, right? You have to know exactly what you stand for, exactly what your why is, exactly where your lines is. And this is one of the things I say to diversity officers all the time, whether I'm coaching, in higher ed or corporate. I tell leaders in this regard in our training programs and our coaching where we tell them, look, there's going to come a time probably where you're going to have to leave. Right? There's an expiration to this role of leadership, just like there is for great CEOs, just like there is for great chief marketing officers, just like there are for great presidents. Times and need will necessitate the type of leaders that we need in our organizations. With diversity officers, the issues don't change, unfortunately, fast enough that the issues have changed that we need a new type of diversity officer necessarily. But what does change is your ability to be effective. Because if you're constantly pushing against the grain, and I'm not talking about standing up, arguing in every meeting, that's not pushing against the grain. That's being a rabble-rousel. But I'm talking about if you're pushing a change agenda in terms of strategy and policy and structure and representation and psychology of working with leaders, but you're doing this strategically in the right way, even then you're going to have an expiration date. You're going to need to move on. So I tell diversity officers all the time, they got to be prepared to move on.
When it comes to navigating the commercial real estate sector dominated by men, Adrienne Lance Lucas assures us that women can also achieve great heights of success.
When you look at the number of hours that you put in, I'd rather work for myself if I'm going to put that much time and energy in and bet on myself than have someone else hold my destiny, right? Because as a woman and as a Black woman, I'm at the intersectionality of both gender and race. And so to go into a corporate environment and have them tell you when you're ready to be promoted, control how much money you're going to make, that just has never been really my personality. And it really does come from what my dad taught us, because it was always about there are only so many hours in a day. And so if you're going to grind and put it out there, do it for yourself and for your children and the legacy that you want to leave so that you can be appreciated for your own work and wealth. Spelman gave me the confidence. You could step out there and be bold. And it also shaped me in my advocacy and activism for people that look like me, brown and Black people and underdogs. Because while I was on campus, we had speakers that looked like me, that were talking to me, right? I heard from Nikki Giovanni saying, write your own story by the time you're 21, right? We heard from Susan Taylor at that time talking about the essence of Black womanhood. And we also saw, similar to what students are seeing today, Mandela was incarcerated. I slept at the front gate of Spelman College in a shanty that we made, right? Protesting. We protested to get the Coke machines off of the campus because they were supporting the apartheid effort. So those are things that I don't think I would have experienced in other places because I would have been that only voice. And I don't think that I had the strength at that time to be the only voice standing up for those issues. So that's really what I got. You know, they're funny stories of just working in male-dominated fields. And it started in consulting because on Fridays when you come back to town or when you're going out, I don't know why the strip club is the number one spot for men to go and interact. It's the golf course.
Chicken wings.
Oh, it's the chicken wings. It's the food, really. But, you know, I had to encounter all of those things of, do you go and hang out with them or do you stand on something else for those principles? And I typically would not choose to do that. I wanted my work to speak for itself. So I would say for the would-be entrepreneurs, make sure that you are built for this life. Because I think sometimes we glamorize entrepreneurship. It's not glamorous. I've said it multiple times. It is a lifestyle. You are choosing to give up certain things, right? Whether it's delayed gratification, whether it's time with your family, unless you can build in your business to where your children, your spouse can participate. So I would say first, tune into that because it's not built for everybody. And the second thing I would say to those entrepreneurs, if you are and you think that you're ready, don't question it too much. Go out there. And if you're younger, you don't know what you're missing. You haven't made a lot of money yet. So go ahead and take the risk because it is probably the most rewarding thing that you will ever do in your entire life is to be able to be responsible for other people from a payroll standpoint, to provide an example for your legacy, whether it's just your children and your family, and to be that example in the community.
When we talk about legacy in Black business, H.J. Russell & Company stands as a pillar, one of the largest and most enduring Black-owned construction and real estate firms in the country. I had the honor of sitting down with its CEO, Michael Russell, who shared how he's carrying forward the vision of his father, Herman Russell, while leading the company into its next chapter. This moment captures what it means to build with excellence, sustain with purpose, and honor a legacy that opened doors for generations to come.
With Black people, you always have to make sure you keep that level of professionalism. Sometimes when we're together and working together, you have to, you can't let it get too familiar where you know the business and the relationship, where the relationship trumps you getting the business done. And I find in our environments, that's just a culture you have to maintain. And it's, you know, as you know, in some of the roles that you have, that's something that you have to work on intentionally and, you know, make sure that culture of professionalism and execution is there. So, and I think, you know, too, everybody needs to, but nobody in a company should feel like they're untouchable, you know, and I think, again, with any company, but you know, you asked me for our organization, to me, it's important that everybody knows that you got to deliver, you got to bring value. You need a partner, you know, with you who's helping you move forward. So I've been fortunate with, you know, my wife, Lavette, of almost 30 years, that, you know, she has helped me be a better leader. I mean, she's, you know, been by my side. She, you know, we like to say she's smarter than I am, which is probably a fact.
Give her that credit.
Yeah, that's right. And so she's able to bring perspective to me, and you know, just has been an asset. So you got to have a team. I guess at the end of the day, your family can't think one way about what you're doing. They got to take pride and own the fact that you're running an enterprise too, and be able to embrace that and take the challenges and the blessings that come with it. And on top of that, with my white colleagues out here, I've been very vocal to say that, silence today is you're complicit. If you're silent today with all that's going on, even if you feel like you're doing X and Y, if you're with your friends and you see or hear things, if you're in your company, and these are mostly leaders, if you're in your company and even though your mind is in the right place, where's your procurement department? Where's your HR department? Where are they as far as making sure that people get an equal opportunity, that Black people get an equal opportunity? So I'm being more vocal in having those conversations, and also trying to create some forums around where these discussions can be had in a safe environment with Black and white business people. That's where I'm focusing my energy, is around business leaders. Because, you hear a lot about social injustice, you hear a lot about political things, but I'm focusing on the economic injustice, and how do we start to change that? Because whenever you start moving, as I say, moving the chips around the table, it's always going to be some angst and consternation around people. But that's really what it's about too. How do we allow Black people and Black businesses to be able to participate in a more significant way? I'm always concerned about young Black people. I mean, I want these young Black people to see a future and to have more of us in a position to succeed than position to fail. And I think we have to continue to stay engaged with our young people and just keep them in a mindset of being productive and being entrepreneurial, because the day of big corporations is ending. I mean, so I think young people have to be more entrepreneurial, more nimble in how they, build a skill set.
Let's begin with a moment of reverence. The late Dr. William Picard left a legacy that can't be overstated, from entrepreneurship to philanthropy to mentorship. Before his passing, I had the privilege of sitting down with him. Here are a few moments that remind us why his wisdom will echo for generations.
And just tell you what God does. When I graduated from the 8th grade at Thomastown Elementary School in LaGrange, Georgia, we had a commencement speaker. They bring back to LaGrange a senior student at Morehouse named Otis Moss to give us the commencement address. Mm-hmm. Now I'm probably, 15, you're sitting there, you probably got your Sunday suit on, and this man said something I have never forgotten. Otis Moss says, "Success without service is worse than a thief in the night." Mm-hmm. So if you become successful, and if you don't service the people, the community, and the God that help you become successful, you're worse than a thief. I have never, ever forgotten that one. I called myself the pop-up Negro. I had a PhD. I was lecturing all over the country for McDonald's on how to treat people. And I just knew I was it. Whenever they needed a Negro to pop up, I raised my hand, I popped up,
Right.
And they built a restaurant, a brand new restaurant, right near where I live. I lived in an area that was about like Shaker Heights, one of the few blacks out there in an apartment, and they was going to put that restaurant. I knew the pop-up Negro had it.
Right.
Pop-up Negro didn't get it. That's okay. You made your decision. Now I'm going to make mine. Mm-hmm. And I started looking at other opportunities. At that time, I had 5 restaurants. I eventually had 9. But by that time, I was in automotive, newspapers, casinos, you name it, because I pivoted.
Right.
I didn't get mad at McDonald's and curse them out. I got mad at McDonald's and made my own plan. Well, without a doubt, I believe that franchising is for people like me, not very smart, low IQ, and can do what they're told. Okay. One of my friends said, "Picard, you're not very bright, man. Franchise is painting by the numbers."
Right.
Painting by the numbers. 1, put in yellow. 2, you put in blue. 3 you put in red. It's really painting by the numbers. And I mastered that one. I don't think I would have been successful starting something from scratch. Mm-hmm. But now I learned the business I acquired in automotive was in bankruptcy. But the bones were there, but the management was not. Mm-hmm. And I was able to bring in some new management. Like, I remember this vividly. So we cut this deal on a Friday, it's raining. And the guy says, anything else you want to talk about, Bill? I said, yeah. I said, I need the president of the company. He said, whew, I was worried about you, because if you thought you were going to, he said, I got 3 people for you. And he brought me a guy named John Tobacek. And Tobacek and I went to work. He took care of the inside. I took care of the outside. I had to go grow the business, get the money, find the people, and grow. And we did it unbelievably well. Right. And I now tell people all the time, failure is never fatal. Failure will not kill you. It's not fatal. Failure is never fatal, and success is never final. We know people every day became very successful. Mm-hmm. 10 years later, they dead broke.
Right.
NBA. 5 years later, they all dead broke. But failure is what I love to say is like Denzel Washington. If you get knocked down 9 times, you got to get up 10 times. And you got to keep getting up. Because if you don't get up, the game can be over.
From rural Tennessee, living life as a sharecropper, to the boardrooms of billion-dollar business deals, Jesse Tyson has navigated corporate America at the highest levels. His interview offered several words of wisdom in business.
I grew up in the rural, segregated South. 7 of us lived in a 4-room house. We had no running water. We had no air conditioning. And the wood-burning cooking stove also served as a heating source for the house. The work day for us was a 6 to 6. So I would get up at 6 a.m. in the morning, do my chores. We would go to the field shortly thereafter, and we would stay in the field picking cotton or chopping cotton, depending on what time of the year it was, until 6 in the afternoon. We were sharecroppers. We stayed on a white family's farm in the house that I described. In exchange for that, we had to harvest a crop, either picking cotton during picking season or chopping cotton during chopping season. And so growing up was a very challenging experience for me as a child, primarily because as I looked across the road and I would see the white kids on the farm playing or going to camps while I was in the field working on behalf of that family. So it did influence me as a kid. But I have to say it influenced me in a positive way, because there are things I knew I did not want my children to experience. So I did what I had to do to make sure that I changed that paradigm. I had a professor from Pakistan who forced me to apply for an internship with the U.S. State Department. And I said no repeatedly. And he said, why? And I said, well, that's for city boys and white boys and girls, not for me. And he said, but you have the same credentials that they would have, so you could do it. So I said no. One day I went to class. He asked the class to dismiss themselves and asked me to stay. I stayed. He went in his desk, put a pen and a file on top, and he said, I fill out the application for you. I just need you to sign it. And to get him off my case, I signed it. I ended up doing an internship with the U.S. State Department. I went to West Africa. And that experience exposed me as a little country boy from Jackson, Tennessee, to what the world really had to offer. And I knew then I could never go back to my hometown. And I don't mean physically, but I mean the things that I did and experienced there would never be anymore in my world, because I had seen what the true global world looked like. And I actually wanted a piece of that. Life should be lived in 3 stages. There's a learning stage, there's an earning stage, and then there's a returning stage. And so the learning stage was obviously getting yourself prepared through high school, undergrad, internships, and graduate studies. The earning phase is if you did the learning phase right, prepared you to have robust earnings over the course of your career. And then there was the return phase, which basically says to whom much is given, much is required. And so it's time to kind of reach back and give to those coming behind you to make sure they had the same opportunities that I had. Those three phases, as I learned over the course of my life, they're not distinct phases where you do one, then you move to two, then you move to three. There's overlap. And I would venture to say at this point in my life, I'm still in the learning phase a little bit. I probably earned most of what I'm going to earn. And so I'm focused more now on the return. The other issue that I had was early in my career, I had one of my peers use the N-word. We were at a cocktail function. I wasn't supposed to have heard it because it wasn't a conversation that I was directly involved in, but I did hear it. And so I am trying to figure out in my head how I should react to this. And so things were going 100 miles an hour in my head because I had been with the company about a year, and all I could do is just hear my grandmother, because I kind of want to go take the guy out, and all I could hear is her saying, "Please don't, please don't." And so the guy he was talking to said, "Don't talk so loud. Jesse may hear you," because I was the only black person on our team. And so I said, "Well, Jesse may hear what?" And he said, "Well, nothing. He had had too much to drink." Well, I heard him. And so we were in Cincinnati, Ohio, at a restaurant called La Maison. It was a 5-star restaurant. I think we were on the 3rd floor. And so I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to react to this. And so in the end, I didn't say anything. And so you fast forward 12 years later. The guy who said it was my boss's peer. 12 years later, I get promoted to a job, and he reported to a guy who reported to a guy who reported to me in my new role. And so I went down to his office on day one and sat down with him and had a chat with him, asked about how his wife was doing, how the boys were doing, et cetera. And he said they were fine. And I said, "I hear you're doing a great job and you enjoy your job." He said, yes. And so everything was fine. The next day he came to my office and asked if I would support a transfer. And I said, "Well, why? I thought you enjoyed your job." He said, "Yeah, I do, but I just think it's time for a change." And so we talked. I said, "Well, come on, tell me why." And so he sat back and he said, "Well, you remember," I said, "that night in Cincinnati at La Maison?" He said, "Yeah, you heard me, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah, I did." And I said, "So is that why you want to transfer?" And he said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Why do I need to be vindictive?" I said, looking at the org chart, I've done okay, relative to where you are. So I don't need to do anything. He said, "Yeah, but I can't take the chance." So anyway, we ended up, he got transferred and everything worked out okay. What I did know is when I would go outside of the U.S., people would listen to what I had to say based on what I was delivering in terms of the business. They didn't see me as a black guy. They just saw me as an American. If they didn't like me, they didn't like me because I was an American, not because I was a black American. And so the thing about the international world that I really, really enjoyed in my career was the opportunity to be me and to do what I felt was the right thing for the business and not feel that I had this extra hurdle of being black in that part of the world. Well, it's the easiest thing in the world to do is to do the easy stuff. And if you do the easy stuff, or if you take the easy assignments, the ones that are not going to stretch you very much, that in my mind is the equivalent of a layup. And you can probably hit 9 out of 9 layups, and you'll be shooting 1,000. All right. But is it going to get you where you want to get to? Versus, all right, I'm going to take a 3. I think I'm ready. I've prepared for it. I practiced for it. The opportunity is here. In many cases, I'm wide open. And so I'm going to take the shot. And if I take the shot, many times I'll make that shot. And if I don't, it doesn't mean the game's over. It just means I missed that shot, and there'll be other shots. But I've seen too often where people are afraid to take the shot because they want to stay in this safe zone. And it's okay to stay in a safe zone, but understand the limits you put on yourself when you decide I'm just going to stay in that safe zone. I always took the position that if you're going to play for all the marbles. Anybody can shoot the layup, or just sit on the sidelines and let your teammate take the shot. But what does that do for you? What does that do for your legacy? What does that do for you in terms of your offsprings if you don't try to position yourself to get to the next level? Because much of what my children do today is a result of what they saw me do or observed in terms of my career. And so had I just kept shooting layups, undoubtedly my children would be still shooting layups today, whereas they don't. In fact, sometimes I'll tell them shoot a layup and still taking the 3, And so as my youngest daughter, I said, why are you always taking the 3? She said, because there's no 4. And so, but no, it's all about taking risk, but calculated risk. If you are prepared and you think you're ready, why did you go through the preparation if you're not willing to step out and make the big move?
Brand architect Ahmed Islam, founder of 1035, shares his insights on entrepreneurship.
I think for me, the point where I realized I had to go was when I asked myself, what's the worst thing that could happen? And the worst thing that could happen was I got to go get another job. And by that point, I was pretty good at that shit. So it was like, all right, if I got to go get another job, some big agency is going to hire me, if not the one I've been working at for the past 3 or 4 years. So that's the worst thing that happens. I'll go get a job. There are a lot of entrepreneurial people out there that have full-time jobs and side hustles. The difference between entrepreneurial and entrepreneur is entrepreneur jumps. And they make their side hustle their main thing. I said, and that's what separates entrepreneurial people from true entrepreneurs, and I think what we're seeing in today's world is that there's a lot more entrepreneurs than just entrepreneurial people, because there's also so much more opportunity, man. I mean, I think just technology, the way the world is right now, I think that I saw a stat that there have been more Black entrepreneurs created in the past 18 months since the death of George Floyd than at any other 18-month period ever, and those are the types of things that I think are amazing in how the world is in some ways different from the world that I made the leap in. We had enough money to give us about a 1-year runway of not getting any clients and being able to keep our families comfortable before it was going to become a problem. So we gave ourselves a year. We didn't have any clients. We had a vision. We had a positioning that we felt was unique. And we had our pedigree. I think that's the other thing that separated us. Because to your point, my business partner had about the same. Matter of fact, he might have had a little more experience than me because I had done the Nike thing, but versus my agency time. And so what we started to see happen was we would get in front of brands, and candidly, it was typically white men. And the conversations would start with them arms folded, having taken this meeting with us because somebody that, they knew asked them, hey, meet with these guys. And the first question was normally, well, before you started your own, your little agency, what did you do? And, my business partner was, I was a vice president at Upshot, an agency that everybody had heard about in Chicago, running a big piece of their Coca-Cola business. And I'm like, well, I was a vice president at Leo, running a big piece of the Army business. Prior to that, I was, 5 years at Nike in a variety of sales and marketing capacities. The arms came down. Because now it's like, oh, okay, you guys actually know what the hell you're doing. So now let's talk about the agency and what that is and how you might be able to help us, or how we might be able to help you through with an opportunity, with a project, all the types of things that you want when you're getting started as a company. But that came from the experience that we had and being able to overcome that barrier of, do you know what you're doing? Because we had played the game in these big agencies at the highest level and proven ourselves there. So there was less reticence to give us an opportunity as a startup agency. May 24th, the day before George Floyd was killed, I had 25 employees, 5 on furlough, trying to figure out what this COVID thing was going to look like. George Floyd's killed May 25th. June 1st, I believe, was the Monday. My phone started ringing. I've hired employee number 84 last week. And so that's what the past 18 months have been like.
And I can see that because one of the things that I've noticed that, 2020 was the craziest year I can ever remember.
But I tell people, though, if you can find a way to stay focused and be strategic in the midst of chaos, you can win. And that was what we were, I think, able to do. And we had clients and relationships where, you know what happened in the world, man. Every brand was trying to figure out how to not piss off Black people. And then it was, how do we actually create meaningful relationships with the community and culture? And now it's, how do we do that, but also positively impact our bottom line and make sure that this isn't just a nice thing to do, but it's the right thing to do for our business. And I think we were very well positioned based off of the work that we've done in the years in this space to be able to be a go-to resource for brands that were looking to do that.
Mark Wilson has redefined what it means to create jobs in underserved communities. His story of building Ryla Teleservices is proof that business can be both profitable and deeply personal.
But it's tough. You can't get any financing from a bank. Everything is bootstrapping. You just have to be scrappy. Being an entrepreneur is not for everybody. Not worrying about and getting too down about things is, I think that's maybe another born thing for me. It's just, I always feel like I can figure it out. There's a way to figure it out. There's a way to have something get done. And that resilience, I think, was very helpful for me to get through those tough years when I didn't have a bank and I didn't have really anything. We raised $1 million of seed capital, pretty early on. That was helpful. That took a little bit of the edge off, but that money was immediately spent because we needed stuff. Yeah, it was actually more intense than that. It was during the day that we had paid everybody. Thought we had made payroll. And some folks were going to the bank and their checks, this was at Ryla really early on, like in the first, real early days. And a bill had gotten paid out of the account, and it was causing there not to be enough money for folks' checks to get cashed. And a lot of our folks go right to the bank to cash their check. And so 3 or 4 people got turned away before it got back to us, and I had to hurry to get to the bank and take money out of our personal account to make sure that the money was there for people to be paid.
Transportation giant Darnell Lee shares how the street life almost prevented him from reaching his true calling.
I never wanted my son to see me in prison or come to visit me in prison. So I had to make a change. And I remember I had to go to court one day, and the judge told me, hey, if I ever see you again, you're going to be doing life. But I was sending life papers to my house. And I told the Lord, I said, Lord, as you get me out of this, I would never go back. And just like a lot of people, I lied. I went back. I went to a skating rink one night, and police came into the bathroom. It was like a goon squad. One of the guys came in there. He was a former drug dealer, and he had cocaine all on him, and he was sniffing it. And so we went in the bathroom. They pushed everybody against the wall. And I had something on me, but the way I kept mine is that you would never see it. And they was about a centimeter from reaching where I kept my drugs at. So when I walked out of the skating ring, I just gave everything away, and I fell on my knees. And that Sunday, it was on a Saturday, that Sunday, I went to church and I gave my life back to Christ. And from there, I've been on fire for the Lord ever since. I got online, I looked in Houston, Texas, and I bought my first van. And I went down there and bought the van, bought it back. On my way through Atlanta, my younger brother, at the time, he still lived in Atlanta. I was living in D.C., so I went back home and I found another van. So I bought 2 vans for less than $30,000, but that same one van cost $30,000 in D.C. Mm-hmm. And so I traded my car in and got rid of it, and I started my company with those 2 vans. I grew from 2 vans to 125 vehicles in my fleet. I went from 1 employee to over 300 employees. I was just coming from a divorce, and I said, well, I don't have to worry about her taking my money because she got her own money. Mm-hmm. So it was very enlightening that, to bringing the 2 skill sets together. But the first thing when I first met her, I told her, I never want to work with you, because I find that so many couples, including myself, when you're in couple relationship, it works for a while, but there's no separation from church and state. Mm-hmm. Anything happening at the business, you taking it home. It's in the bedroom. I want to hear Luther. You talking about balance sheets and all like this. I don't need no balance sheet. I got other things on my mind, right? I want to balance something else. Right. So, but that's the thing you have. I mean, but some couples may work out. Mm-hmm. It didn't work out for me, and I don't ever want to work with my spouse ever again. I just want to be husband, supporter. Right. I just want her to be my wife.
Fashion is his business, but Miguel Wilson is really in the business of confidence. This clip highlights how his luxury menswear brand is stitched with identity, legacy, and love for the culture.
On top of all that, I get the letter from the IRS saying, hey, 2009, you made $1 million. And your taxes weren't right, whatever. So they audited me. But prior to them auditing me, all my records got destroyed in a flood. In one of my houses that I had them in a garage, and then the garage got flooded, my office got flooded, and everything was just gone. So when they came, I didn't have any records. So, I got bank statements, I have email stuff, but, back then I didn't really have stuff documented like that. So they said, basically you owe $1 million because 1, you made $1 million, but you have no write-offs. So basically that $1 million is all income to you. So that's $300-something thousand, 33%, whatever it was. And then on top of that, you had penalties, interest, and all that stuff. Man, by the end of it all, I owed $1 million. So that was very deflating because it robbed me of a lot of hope. Before that, I was, still hopeful that I have a bright future. I can, work my way out of this. But now you're telling me that, you're going to take my next $1 million on top of, I never be able to recover from this. I can't catch up with the rate of penalties and interest and all that type of stuff. So it was disturbing. So we go over to the office for Phipps is in Lenox. So I went to the office there, I sat down, and she's like, well, I got this small space. There's no AC or heat. There's no bathroom. And it's like 600 square feet. And I do it for you for $2,000. I'm like, okay. Now, I'm paying a significant amount to be in the other space. And so this was like, okay, I was surprised that 2,000 was the number. I said, sure, I'll take it. She put a contract in front of me. She said, sign here. Now, I'm going in thinking we're going to talk about, and I'm learning about what it would take to be in here. And I left that meeting with keys. And I attribute that 1,000% to the changes I made in my life and trying to be right and trying to do good and trying to be honest and praying and asking God for forgiveness for my past sins and all the stuff. And I just think that led me to this day of getting something outside of the normal expectations, okay? Because when you're getting real estate of this magnitude, usually they want to see financials. Usually they want deposits. Usually they want a whole lot of stuff. They want to see your credit. Had she asked me for any of that, I would have immediately failed. And when I left, I'm thinking, man, she just made a mistake. I got a feeling she's going to call me back and say, oh, yeah, by the way, I forgot to get your bank statement. So I forgot to get your credit. Never called back. And through God's good grace and mercy, worked out where I got that store, that little small little store, and gave me a vision and also gave me the resources within a month to finish it out. For me, I am a person that leaves revenge to God. Period. I'm not going to be the guy to go after you for wronging me. And what I found is time after time after time after time, God has always restored me to a place better than I could have had I acted on my own each time. So just as a way of life now, it's not even questionable, you know. You can do me however you want to, but you know, I'll let God handle you. And that seemed to be just a good way for me to operate in life.
A strategic thinker and community investor, Brian Rand is helping shape the future of business in thoughtful, equitable ways.
I enjoy having that foundation because when somebody starts talking really quickly and using a bunch of acronyms, I can say, stop. Let's just do the accounting. Give me the debits and credits so I can see where the money flows. And you just get a different level of respect, especially as a black man, when you're just like, stop. I'd rather just talk through the numbers because I think so many times people assume that we can talk. They assume we can sell or give ideas. But sometimes being able to show like, no, I'm happy to just get to the math gets you a different level of respect, at least in my experience. And he said, let me tell you about being black on Wall Street. You've got a spotlight on you. So let me tell you about how that spotlight works. He said, hey, if you're a star with the spotlight, you're the brightest star and everybody knows you. And it's going to be awesome. He said, if you're not doing well, if you're struggling with the spotlight and you won't last long. And he said, the thing that's really tough about this is that if you're average, you're going to be average with the spotlight, you don't slip through the cracks. You don't get the benefit of the doubt. You're publicly average. And I would say that has been very consistent with my experience. And there were just a number of times where there were the kind of small, for lack of a better word, microaggressions, where a senior person didn't necessarily always see me, or see themselves in me. And I would hear about how folks had gotten together on the weekend or gone water skiing or had just had interactions where I wasn't invited. And I don't think there was ill will, but I noticed that. And then, frankly, there have been other interactions that were a lot less positive, that were more overt, where jokes got made that were in super poor taste. It's supposed to be hard. That if you're going to do something that matters, that it's not going to be a smooth ride. That like settling in to understand that if you get your wildest dreams of business success, that the path there is going to be tough. That there's going to be thousands of no's, that you're going to get sued every other week, that your best and closest employees and mentees are going to quit on you, that you're going to have the biggest business meeting of your career, and that morning your childcare is not going to show up. That is the business we're in, that this is a business and life of constant crisis, interrupted by brief periods of success.
Kamal Grant turned a childhood love of sweets into a donut empire. In this highlight, he shares his recipe of success.
Being in the Navy, it was a whole different story because these are people that are stuck in a confined space with you, and they're quick to tell you they hate it. I hate you. Everything you made was terrible yesterday. You need to do better. You know what I'm saying? So you really got quality feedback. And, people really enjoy the cinnamon rolls, and I really could perfect making the best cinnamon rolls and other things like that. So that was really a fun, unique experience in my early journey of, trying to become the best baker I could possibly be. So I think a tech student, she was from Bangkok, Thailand. She used to come by the donut shop frequently. So I think she wrote on like a Thai blog, oh, these are the best donuts in America, best donuts she ever had. and it was maybe like a popular Thai blog, and a gentleman from Thailand, entrepreneur, wanted to introduce a really unique donut shop. And this is kind of when donuts were having their heyday. So he really wanted to franchise a donut shop from America in Thailand, but he didn't want to go the Krispy Kreme or Dunkin' Donuts. He wanted to have a unique brand that he could really expand with. And he contacted me. And that's the thing about being an entrepreneur. You tell anybody, they're gonna be like, oh, don't do it. They're gonna steal your ideas. You know, you're so small. And I was like, you know what? It doesn't matter if they steal my ideas. Like, we're gonna obviously get a lawyer and a contract going together, and we're gonna put that in place. But, you know, the thing about being in Thailand, he could decide to stop paying royalties or to make terrible donuts. And, you know, that could hurt the brand. And I was like, they're in Thailand. Like, it won't hurt the brand. And someone could just go right now and just copy my website and steal my whole thing, and I would never know about it. You know what I'm saying? So I said, let's figure it out and let's work together. And it turned out he was a great partner.
Dr. Lakeisha Hallman lives her mantra, support is a verb. Here, she reminds us that community investment isn't charity, it's strategy. And every dollar we spend is a vote for the world we want.
If we want our communities to thrive, if we want our HBCUs to exist, if we want economic mobility to happen, we have to be very intentional with what we do with our actions. And so for me, the Village Market was all about funneling our dollars to Black enterprises. But at the end of that, Black enterprises, Black entrepreneurs, Black small business owners understand that there's a collective wealth building model that we're building. We're not funneling dollars to you just so you can be a single-minded multimillionaire, because it does nothing for our community to rebuild constructs of individualism. I want to ensure that we're taking a holistic approach of what entrepreneurship means, small business ownership means, because I want our enterprises to be sustainable. And I want us to be well, mind, body, and spirit, because I think that would make us better business owners. And not just better business owners, it makes us better people. We need better people leading companies. We need better people that reach a level of success and say, oh no, it's my responsibility to give back. We do hoard things. If we got a good photographer, you don't want nobody else to have that photographer because you want your pictures to be the best. You know what? I honestly think it takes hearing somebody say it. Like, stop hoarding. Stop keeping these gifts and gems of our community a secret, that you may not have the financial capital to spend that 10%, 15% monthly on a Black business, but can you refer them out? Can you put them on your social? And so I think how we do that is arming the community to see that that is an act of agency. There's an act of owning the people and saying that this person is a part of me, that I'm advocating for them. Because I believe that most people want to be a part of change. They want to be a part of the thing that really defied the opposite of it. And so if we arm people that by you writing a review, you sharing this business, when people come into town and say, oh, you're tagging them and say, you have to go by Village Retail, that is an act of advocacy. And so it's less about being passive in moments, but more about being active participants of our community. But all of this takes a choice. We have to be willing to be these people. Let's talk less theorizing about it and actually doing it. And I don't think it's that hard, but we have to confront our things. We have to be very honest with ourselves.
Ryan Wilson of The Gathering Spot didn't just build a private club, he built a movement. Here are a few standout moments in a conversation full of business gems.
You got to do things on credit. And look, there are going to be deals that work out and there are going to be deals that don't work out. But at the end of the day, you have to do what you can control, right? And so what I can control is if I have an opportunity to help to facilitate an opportunity, then that's my job in the equation. And I hope that you do the best that you can do. But if you don't, for whatever reason, I've just got to take that loss, right? So I'm one of those folks that, like, I get frustrated when I hear people say, oh, I tried that one time 10 years ago and it didn't work out, so I'll never do it again. At the end of the day, and I know that you've spoken to one of my friends, Dr. Key. Dr. Key talks about the fact that, like, we have to be intentional about being in support of one another And then no one is self-made, right? We're all community-made is how I understand it. So to be community-made, that means that someone had to take a shot with you, on you. And if you're in a position to be able to facilitate and pass that on, then you should do it. Knowing that sometimes it is not going to work out. You will be disappointed at some point in the journey. And so I have been, but I will continue to wake up tomorrow and on credit. Again, I don't do all of these extra examinations. And that's not to say that there's no, like, I'll look to make sure that it feels like a good decision. But beyond that, I try to do what I see happen in other communities all the time, where people will take a bet on someone and hope that it works. I was working at a law firm in Buckhead, and it was cool. I had an office. First time I'd ever had an office, and we had a great view looking at the city from where we were. And it was the same summer that George Zimmerman was on trial for Trayvon Martin's murder. And I was watching that trial. I was doing my work, but I had the trial on like a lot of folks. To make a long story short, when he was acquitted of Trayvon Martin's murder, I got an email from some friends that said, what are we going to do? I had been doing a lot of community-based work in D.C., so this email wasn't out of context. But I responded back saying, hey, look, we need a physical place to have this conversation. I think that a lot of the fundamentals of college, access to people, access to space, access to thought leadership, like we knew where we could organize. All of that had kind of gone away. And I wanted to build a place where we could have all of those elements back. So it was one quick paragraph. The next day I sent that same couple sentences to my college roommate. His name is TK. And he had a background in finance and accounting. So I was like, hey, look, can you help me build a model around this concept? We started meeting every single day from that moment on. And by the time, again, I graduated from law school a couple years later, we had the business plan and we're at a point where the business could launch. It's something that frankly is scary to me, right? So 96% of Black-owned businesses don't employ anyone. And my argument is that it doesn't really matter if you go to a PWI or an HBCU. At the end of the day, statistically speaking, you will never work at a Black-owned business because 96% of Black-owned businesses don't employ anyone. So I don't say it as a point of shame, but I do think it's important for us to frame up because if we're going to get there, wherever there is, we've got to know where we are, and where we are is in a really tough spot, right? The vast majority of people that will walk across any stage, PWI, HBCU, are almost 100%, right? The numbers are that bad. You're either going to go work for government in some way, or you're going to go work for a company that is not likely to be owned by someone in your community. That is unlike many other communities, and it's a problem that really exists for everyone. I think sometimes, like, the other way that this conversation gets limited is folks only focus on the impact that that has on Black folks. It's actually not good for anybody that Black-owned businesses aren't scaling, right? There are, depending on where you live, thousands and thousands of jobs that would be created if Black folks had parity in terms of the employer firms that exist in a community. So I'm laser focused there. I mean, we have to be having conversations about starting companies, yes, but we have to be scaling those businesses because when we scale, that's when good employment opportunities happen. And then from there are a ton of other good social things that happen out in the community. Education, housing, any of the other things that we want to discuss. The foundation of a lot of those concerns happens when a community isn't able to employ itself. So to the learn how to raise piece, like that's huge. So I said 97 no's before the first person said yes. That's a true number. But I can be honest with you that like the first half of those, at least, probably more, were really not good pitches. Like I did not understand the fundamentals of just what those conversations were about. I would get there and talk to you about all the things that I was passionate about and how exciting it was going to be and why we cared so much. And at the end of the day, and I will encourage anybody that's looking at a raise, at its core, that process is about trying to figure out how you are going to return value. And I missed that signal in a lot of those conversations. I would talk about everything but the fact that you're going to give me some money and I'm going to give you some more money back at some point, hopefully in the next 3 to 5 years. Sounds very one-on-one, but like I skipped past go a lot and was straight on to all the other stuff. And that's what investors care about. I love the game. And if you don't love the game, I don't know if I can tell you to play it, right? Like you have to love this sport. You look at any person that like when they're in the thing that they're supposed to be doing, all that other stuff doesn't really matter, right? They love the game. The thing that TK and I would always say to each other is that like, if we have an opportunity to have an opportunity, what a blessing that is. Another way of looking at that is that, like, if you pray for something and then you have the opportunity to have that thing materialize. Again, sometimes entrepreneurship talk starts sounding very Superman-like, and I don't want anybody to experience it this way, but you don't really experience failure in that way, right? It's a part of the game. It might be a loss of this particular game or maybe even a loss of the season, but like, you have to have a fundamental belief that you're going to win. And just doing it for the math, like just the quantitative aspects of I'm not the right person, right? Because, man, I have a law degree, right? Like if this was about just making money, the economics would say that I should go spend time doing something else, and especially in the early days of this thing. But I love the game. And there's a lot of ways to make a dollar. Being a business owner does not have to be one of those ways if you're not super passionate about it. So gut check yourself there. No one else can inform that, right? Like I don't think that it's even worth talking to anybody about it. Do you fundamentally think that this thing that you're doing needs to exist in the world? And are you the best possible person to make that thing happen? If the answer to those questions is yes, all that other stuff doesn't really matter.
Kenneth Duncan brings innovation to the fairway. As founder of Renegade Golf, he's merging sport, culture, and entrepreneurship in a way that's changing the game, literally.
At the same time, President Trump was enacting some tariffs against China, very similar to right now. And in doing so, the tariffs were significantly higher than we ever expected, or higher than what they were previous to us having the golf bags. So now, we were already double our costs. We had to add an extra 40 to 50% on top of our products for the additional tariffs that were coming in. And then third, you start looking at freight logistics and realizing how long it takes to ship goods on a boat from overseas and finding that freight forwarder, finding the right licensing, bonding, all of those different things, insurance, added up to be, well more than 2 to 3 times the cost we ever expected to really get into, doing freight imports. And I think that's something a lot of people don't consider. You think of the price of the good. They don't consider the shipping for the good, the storage for the good, the tariffs and the taxes that come along with it. And that was probably our first real major learning moment. We had another really large one where we actually had our second shipment ever fell off a container ship. And we had never thought of the concept of having freight insurance because container ship accidents happen 1 in every 10,000 incidents. So you have a very low chance of having that happen. But when a tsunami hits Asia and you have $10,000 to $15,000 of goods you paid for in cash, you have some risk and liability there. So there's a lot of learning lessons to come out of the early stages of importing a good, some of them political that you can't control, and some of them that we probably could have learned more from doing additional research prior. So, Renegade was the first ever Black-owned golf ball company in the world and the first ever to have a USGA-conforming golf ball. So I think we have a place in history that we're happy about, that we celebrate, that we feel a lot of pride in. But we wouldn't be here today, well, A, without Tiger Woods, because Tiger was probably my biggest influence and role model in golf. But the people that influenced Tiger are the people who really are the pioneers and trailblazers for which Renegade was built off of. So one story I remember very vividly was, I was interviewing on the Golf Channel and having a conversation with their team about, who inspired me in golf. And my answer was Tiger Woods, Cameron Champ, and Steph Curry. And I remember leaving there feeling like, that's not an answer for a person that's had decades of golfers before him that dealt with so much. The best I could muster up was Cameron Champ and Stephen Curry. Not because those aren't great individuals who have a lot of contributions to the golf game, but that I wasn't really in tune or close enough to research the people that come before me to understand just what legacy we were hoping to build upon. So after that, I took the time to read some golf literature and got familiar with people like Charlie Sifford. Charlie Sifford was the first Black person to have his PGA Tour card. He broke through that barrier in 1961. And, I've been fortunate enough to build a relationship with Charlie Sifford Jr., who actually lives there in Cleveland, and they actually play at Highland Park Golf Course. So that's been the first name that I've been connected to, that I felt a real connection to, and realizing what we're doing today builds on top of his legacy. But there's other people too. There's Lee Elder, who we have a golf course in D.C., and he played at Langston Golf Course in D.C., one of the few Black courses that Blacks could play back there. And there's a lot of people that come before us that had that experience you mentioned at Highland that could only play at certain golf courses. And we hope to have our products at every one of those courses to sort of commemorate the fact that they stood there long before that we were able to have a Renegade Golf. But now we're here today hoping to build upon what they did previously.
Carl Gorman is a real estate investor on a mission to bridge the wealth gap. In this vulnerable moment, he shares what changed his trajectory in life.
So we were walking down the street and I see a police officer kind of go the other direction that we're going. And then I see him out of my peripheral that he spins around and he's coming towards us. Again, we're just walking down the street. He flips on the light. He asks us to essentially stop. And then before we knew it, there was 2 other officer cars that came up, and now we're, 6 officers around us. And, my fraternity brothers were like, hey, Carl, you go talk to the police officers. You're better at this than we are. So I said, okay. And so I said, officer, what's going on? He says, I need your identification, all of you guys. And I said, no problem. You want driver's license or you want our student identification? And he says, give me your driver's license. So I go back to our group. I say, hey, guys, give me your stuff. Give me your driver's license and your student ID, because I thought the student ID would give some credibility of why we were there. Handed them the information. At this point, now there's 12 officers around us. Now we're sitting down on the sidewalk, and they're just reviewing our information back in their squad cars. And so as we sit there and we wait, and, it's probably about 45 minutes to an hour that goes by. Again, there's 1,000 people that are walking by us, looking and laughing. We're essentially sitting down on the curve, and you've got all these police officers around us like we've done something wrong. So they give us our information back, hand us all the cards back in my hand, and they were like, all right, you guys are free to go. And we were all like, okay. And then my one fraternity brother said, well, why did you hold us in the first place? Well, the police officers got very aggressive at that time. They grabbed us all. They flipped us upside down. And one officer, and I couldn't see my guys at that point, but one officer pulled his gun out, put it to my head, and said, tonight you're going to die. And he used the N-word. And we're all shocked. I mean, even looking back on it, it terrifies me a little bit, because I think about people that don't understand what it's like to be an African-American male. And at that point, I said, okay, it got cleared up. It went black for a little bit, but essentially they put their guns back in their holsters and let us up and let us go about our way. And, we essentially went back to the dorm rooms. We were going to go to, my brother was playing football that day. We were going to go to the game and watch the game and hang out. And essentially we just went back to the dorm room and really discussed kind of what happened. In that moment, that was the defining moment where I said, there's nothing I can do for the color of my skin. But what I can do is I can try to even the playing fields by making as much money as I possibly could make. So we didn't have to displace anybody. And so we fixed up the outside, left everybody in. We took everybody that was on the inside, put them in extended stay while we fixed up the inside. And we're talking about a C- neighborhood. So it wasn't anything crazy, but we gave them a working stove, a working microwave, carpet, paint, countertops, so nothing crazy. So once we were done, we went back, and I'm just kind of looking at it and taking video of it. And this African-American lady in her mid-70s, she's on a porch, and she's looking at me do this, and she comes down and she says, are you GLH? And I said, yeah. And at that time, no one knew what GLH was. And she says, are you Carl? And I said, yeah. And she says, thank you for changing the community. And I said, what do you mean by that? And she says, well, this was a food desert before you fixed up these duplexes. But because of what you've done, we now have a local grocery store that's moved in. I said, well, what's a food desert? And she says, well, we didn't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. You had to go across the county, essentially, to go to a grocery store. I said, well, where would you guys eat? And she says, well, there's a liquor store on every corner. And so we would go to the liquor store. There's delis in there, and we would eat the delis or the McDonald's that are associated with our neighborhood, fast food. And I said, interesting. And she says, and because of what you did, we now have taken back the park that's there. And I said, what do you mean? She says, we called the police on all of the bad people that were in the park. So you had prostitutions, you had gangsters, you had pretty much everything that could go wrong was going wrong in that park. And they called the police on, which is, again, what you don't do in the African-American community. And then they went out and mowed the lawn. They went out and painted the structures. They went out and maintained the area, and now it's still maintained to this day. And she says, now we've got a place for our kids to play. And so she's telling me all these things, and I'm just thinking in the back of my head, I've done really all of this to make money. I didn't do this to make a difference. And I paused and I said, well, wait a minute. I can actually make money and make a difference at the same time. And then I was on fire. That's when I quit my job. I told them that I'm going to go do this full time. Unfortunately, African-American people don't buy from African American people, right? There's a lot of statistics around it. We don't trust each other. And in my fund today, I would say that there are, out of the 50, 60 folks that are investing with GLH Capital, we got 3 people that are African American, right? So, the challenge was, I'm going to start this fund and I'm going to go after the people that I know and love and trust me. And 2 challenges for them. 1, they don't have the capital. And then 2, they don't trust that Carl can do this, or another African-American guy. It's not personal to me, because I've seen other really successful real estate guys that know what they're doing, and they can't raise capital from our community. But that same friend that they're going to the bar with is taking their capital and investing it with somebody else that doesn't look like him.
From civic tech to transparency in government, Demola Ogundipe is using data to disrupt. This moment from our episode captures how he's making public data truly impactful.
Something that I do think is important is, especially in this modern age, I don't recommend, and I don't think it's necessary I have an idea, I want to be an entrepreneur, so I'm going to stop everything else that I'm doing and focus on this thing. At that specific point in time, you should have the discernment as an entrepreneur to know when the time is right. That's part of what goes into being a successful entrepreneur. There's no steadfast rule of this is when you should quit your full-time job that pays for you and your family's well-being, but you should know. And it usually will not be, and probably should not be, when it's a one-to-one paycheck. You make $100K doing your full-time job. Now I can make $100K running this thing. So now I'm going to quit my full-time job. It should not be the case, right? But there will be a point in time with internal discernment to know, it's time. I think I can make this something, whatever you were looking for, whatever you needed validation that this could work, and then now you need to put all your energy into it. You should have the discernment as an entrepreneur. Whatever you do, it just needs to have AI in it. You can make the argument, and this is a whole different podcast episode, but you can make the argument that every white-collar analytical job that exists right now in the U.S. will be automated with AI before 2035. I think you can make a concrete case for that with the way AI is improving, the way compute costs are going down, and all associated costs when it comes to compute are going down. The investments that we're making, not just in the private sector investments, but public sector investments. So if you're coming out and you're starting a new business, I don't know. I don't have this is the industry, this is the thing. What I do know is that AI has to be at the center of it for sure. This is not a crypto moment or a Web3 moment, this is a catalytic internet type moment, right? But what I will say is that it needs to be something that you actually care about solving. You have to solve a problem. It can't just be, I am building something that is, and I think it's going to be financially successful, that I'm just interested in, or isn't an incremental, improvement in the status quo. Everybody right now has to think really big. So think big, dream big. Chances are getting started isn't going to be too high of a cost, won't be too high of a barrier because of AI. But think really, really big. Think big, think global. Don't just worry about solving problems in the U.S. Think about solving problems both in the U.S. and in other countries. Think about solving problems that aren't so obvious, but you're seeing in your day-to-day life. But make sure that, especially if it's technology-oriented, and even if it's not technology-oriented, make sure that you're thinking about what the future of what you're building looks like with artificial intelligence.
I hope you enjoyed these words of wisdom and that you take some time in the weeks ahead to revisit the full interviews, because trust me, each one is packed with even more insight, more gems, and more fuel for the journey. This episode wasn't just about looking back, it was about honoring the voices that have shaped Give 'em the Business and setting the tone for where we're headed. These conversations are a reminder that Black excellence in business isn't a trend, it's a tradition. And we're here to document it, amplify it, and build on it. Thank you for being a part of this milestone. Whether you've been listening since episode 1 or you just tapped in, your support keeps this platform moving forward. If you want to learn more about Black entrepreneurs and business leaders who have made an impact, make sure to subscribe to this podcast and follow us on our YouTube channel at Give 'em the Business. Also, make sure to follow us on social media at Give 'em the Business Podcast. And if you want to send me a message, you can find me at I am Troy D. Evans. Given the Business is produced by Two Comma Media. Thanks for listening, and always remember to Troy harder.